I'd like to invite to the stage candidate for Secretary of State, Marcell Strbich.
Thank you, everybody. All right. Appreciate you. I move around a little bit. I maybe pick up some tempo here, and I do want to give a lot of time for your questions. I like questions. I'm a first-time candidate running for office here in Ohio. I'm a 20-year Air Force Intel officer. I live in Dayton, Ohio. I got 3 kids, 2, and I appreciate things that Casey was talking about for our children, because I do have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old boy, and they're growing up in America, and they're looking up to their dad. And tonight they don't get to be with me, and my 2-year-old doesn't get to be with me. But you want to know why? Because I'm here for you, and I'm here for this state to address the problems and issues that have come about. Thank you. Elections, okay? The Secretary of State race used to be a sleepy race in Ohio. Who the heck, what does a Secretary of State do? Well, election administration, business services, and campaign finance reform. Doesn't sound sexy, right? Oh, it sure is. Because your vote is your voice. And we saw what happened to our country when our vote and voice was diluted in several swing states in this country. In our lives, in my life, which I'm going to relay a little bit to you tonight, and why I'm here, and why I'm running, and why I'm passionate about this, and why we're going to win, is what we're going to end this on. But it starts really with me in a 1,200 square foot apartment in the city of Chicago to first-generation American parents. My parents were restaurant owners. They worked their entire life. They escaped communism in Europe. They took it upon themselves to come to the United States and give back to this culture. They assimilated. They worked very hard. They were a net gain in our society. Everything. Put their kids through school. I was the youngest of 3 kids. We grew up in this business, and I had to go serve people like this every time in the restaurant, and that was probably the best lesson in life. I learned my work ethic. I learned my personality. Everything came out of that. As I got older, I saw my brother go in the Air Force. For many of you who are thinking about military, it is an exceptional experience. I wanted to do something, and then what happened? 9/11. And I saw in America something I had never seen at that point as a 19-year-old man, and I thought, this is the time that we have to step up as a country, because our country was attacked for the first time like it never was since World War II. So I gave it myself. I went to Indiana University. I got a degree. I commissioned as an officer in ROTC, and because I was the top cadet, they gave me the pick of my assignment. They gave me intelligence. All right, so what was I going to do with that? Well, as soon as I graduated from school, we had a little problem called Iraq. And Iraq was kicking off because we were trying a nation-state build. We were building forever wars. We had this idea that America's going to build a democracy in a country and a culture that's incompatible right now with that concept. So it gets better, right? At this point, nobody's thinking about these people. They're just thinking, send guys like me overseas to take care of the problem, right? Because we don't want that problem at home. In the meantime, I'm going to Iraq. I'm flying 117 combat missions. I'm protecting American forces on the ground so as many people can come back to Ohio to be with their families. Okay? I did my job, and I had a choice. What do I want to do? So I decided, I'm going to stick around because I felt so valued at saving lives, and in some cases, we took lives. There's other veterans here that know about this. You picked a smart state rep who's also a commander. He knows what this was like, and I'm sure he had some part in this. He knows what this was like building up military force. So we went overseas so they wouldn't come over here. When I finished with that assignment, I had another opportunity, and it involved Ohio. So this is what brought me to my home here in Ohio. I'm Ohio by choice, and I'm blessed to be here. At that point, I had a choice to go into the FBI, and I thought this was the place so I can get back home, and then I could do something else. And I pretty much was accepted to go into the FBI. However, something else intervened. I met my wife, and God said, you know what? You need to be a husband, you need to be a father, and you need to raise a family. And I basically said, you can keep the FBI thing. I'm going to stay in Ohio. I'm going to stay in the Air Force. And they were happy to keep me. And as a result of that, my life changed for the better. My family, from my wife's side, is from Delaware County. Mahoning Valley is where my father-in-law is. They worked at a GM plant growing up. We are a very pro-labor Republican kind of family. And that's the way we operate. Thank you. So, all that put aside, 2011, 2012, I get an assignment, I get married, I leave, December 7th is when I get married, Pearl Harbor Day. I don't think at this point that I'm ever going to do anything politically. I'm going to serve my 20 years in the military, and I'm looking forward to being a civilian. All that passes by. I end up going to higher level schools. I end up serving at the Pentagon. I serve the Vice Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. I serve the Joint J2. That person essentially gives me a portfolio to run the entire force modernization for the Department of Defense, $25 billion portfolio. Why do I bring that up? Why is it relevant for today? I got to work most recently with the latest companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Palantir. All of that matters when you want to build a warfighting machine, but it also matters when you want to build a top-notch election system that can actually talk between the Board of Elections, the Secretary of State, and the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. That's not happening today. I'll pause on the stuff real quick and hit that real quick. 7.8 million registered voters in Ohio. Do you know how many of those were qualified before they were ever given a voter ID number in the state of Ohio? 0. What do you mean, Marcell? What are you saying? No, this is the truth. Because the federal government passed a law in 1993, everyone is supposed to qualify for voting before we know whether they are fully qualified. So what happens is the Board of Elections don't have access to identity, residency, and citizenship information. The Secretary of State checks it after the fact. So how many of those people in the last few years ended up on our voter rolls who weren't even qualified or registered properly to vote? We don't know the answer fully, but we do know that there were thousands registered that were illegal, not supposed to be in the country, and we do know that some of them voted. Every time one of those votes crosses the path and gets picked, that's our voice getting taken away. So when I got to Ohio in 2022, I should say this first. When I got to the Pentagon in 2020 and I experienced the outcome of that election, we went from being heroes to zeros overnight. What do I mean? The Biden administration, within the first 2 months, categorized military service members like myself who had an informed conscience over COVID as potential domestic extremists. Furthest from the truth. I was willing to take a stand. Now, while this state and the governor and all of these candidates who are trying to run for office right now were quiet as this state was shut down. They didn't say anything about the elections being shut down, even though that cost us $30 million. Where were they then? Now some of them want to speak out, and they want to say what they're going to do to fix these issues. You had your chance. They had their chance. This is what is finally changing in the paradigm. It was talked about by some of the candidates. They had an opportunity. They didn't stand up because they were spineless about the issue. No more. We will never let it happen again because we're going to address it once and for all. So I get to Montgomery County in 2022, and then I experienced this commissioner race. The commissioner race was decided on election night as a win for a Republican in Montgomery County. But it took them 20 days to count the votes. It was done in a way where there wasn't surveillance capturing the imagery, and it didn't include a bipartisan Republican and Democrat. So how did that end up? Well, they said at the end that the guy lost. So I said, let's do an investigation here in Montgomery County. What happened? Why wouldn't you do an investigation? And you know what the director told them? The director said the candidate's not telling the truth. Why are you afraid to do an investigation then? It'll reveal that there's no that's not an issue, right? Well, it turns out we have the same issues depending on what county you're in Ohio. So I took note of that. And I said, you know what I'm going to do next? Because I'm the type of guy that I don't stop. I'm relentless. That's why I'm having success in this race, and we'll definitely talk about that. Thank you. So I went to the state capitol, and I said, you know what? I used to write policy for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Let me go look at Title 35. That's election law. So every night I put my kids to bed. I spend a few hours reading election law, process, boring stuff that I can consume. And before you know it, I realized that we can change these laws so that we can qualify people up front so we never have situations like that. So I wrote 2 bills. And at the time, I'm a nobody, right? I'm a statewide advocate, constituent advocate. This is the power of the people, right? So I went to Columbus. I wrote proponent testimony. I gave it. The bill didn't go anywhere because there was no political appetite or will. And the only thing I ever heard was we're a gold standard. There's nothing to change here. And I said, that can't be the case because the country's being destroyed with open borders. People are coming into this state who I kept out, okay, who I kept out. were being brought in mass, okay? And I realized with the way you can register in Ohio with the last 4 of your Social Security, who's going to stop these people or others that we allow to participate? Did you know in Ohio, we have third-party voter registration groups? That's not required by federal law. Why are we allowing this in our state for these entities to do business in voter engagement activities? It's pointless. But we opened up our own vulnerability by doing that. So I gave this proponent testimony. It didn't go anywhere. I said, okay, what's the next thing that I can do? So the next thing I said is, how about I organize a statewide level of grassroots groups, an interested party, and let's address what happened in Hamilton County. Hamilton County defrauded the voter records by putting people like Henry Kissinger and signing people up. And they did it in such a way that the only reason we found it was because a couple who had their name re-registered without their knowledge reported it, and then they had to investigate it. But if nobody actually says anything, do we actually know how many were truly done in that way? So at the end, I ended up getting a letter out, and I think your rep was on the letter that came out to do something about it, and the question got posed to Secretary LaRose. What are you going to do about these third-party groups in Ohio defrauding the process? So it took him a couple months. He was busy running the election, but he gave an answer. And here's what the answer was, and this shows you how shot the system is. He came back and said, the county prosecutors refused to prosecute the criminal referrals that I sent over to the 20 different counties this kind of stuff happened in. And so what ended up happening from that is he said he kicked it over to the Attorney General, but the Attorney General said there wasn't clear enough language in the law for them to do something about it. So now we have basically 2 strikes. So at the time, President Trump was not elected. The DOJ was not active on this issue. And the question becomes now, how are we going to handle this? What is your deterrent? So I wrote another bill, this one, prohibiting third-party voter engagement organizations, nonprofits and for-profits, from even being able to handle our voter registration forms. Not a bad idea, right? Again, no political will. Finally, election happens. We're fortunate President Trump gets back in. And at this point, I'm thinking, well, Secretary LaRose is not running. Who's going to run? And I'm ready to help whomever if they're willing to take these ideas. I'm still not thinking of running, and this is around January of 25. So then finally, President Trump comes out and invites all the governors in February to come up to the White House. So our governor trots up there, and he gets a nice table in the front. And President Trump, you can watch these videos, he asked the governors to do something about election integrity. He wants same-day in-person voting. He wants pre-printed hand-markable ballots, no vote-casting touchscreen machines that are secured to a 2005 standard. Our votes are recorded inside of QR codes and barcodes. And I'm thinking, oh boy, Ohio's a plus 12 Trump state. For sure we're going to do something now, right? He's got the governor. He's got all the Republican supermajority. There's no way they're not going to listen to President Trump. 1 month goes by, nothing. I start squawking on social media. I start, poking the bear. I say, you know what? Here's my last attempt. So I go to the State Central Committee, right, Doris? Because surely the State Central Committee can give guidance to the legislature to tell the legislature that President Trump's executive order needs to be executed. And I went ahead and wrote the resolution. And I sent it in, and the Resolutions Committee took a look at it, and it codified everything that President Trump wanted in our elections for the country. Because we need to get back to a simpler, less costly, less controversial system. So what do you think happened there? Nothing. So at the end of the day, I said, who's running for Secretary of State? I heard some guy, he's a treasurer. He's got 8 years as in the legislature. He said he wanted to be the governor for the right reasons. He announced that in January. Vivek announced in February. And then he announced right after Vivek that he doesn't want to be the governor anymore. He wants to be the Secretary of State. I said, okay, let's give the guy a call because I want to talk to him. I hope that he's willing to hear what I had to say, but I didn't get a call back. Unfortunate for me, I can't seem to engage and get what I need to get done for Ohio's election systems. So as I'm on Bob Francis' show, it's my 43rd birthday, March 12th. Some fans in here. And so I go and I get on the radio, and I've been on there many times. I talk to him in Windsor all the time about these vulnerabilities. And everything I say is backed up by facts. I don't make any of this up. This is through research. This is through everything that I do. And he said, why don't you, have you ever thought about running for office? And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to put my family through that. I know how that stuff can be. I like politics. I follow it like you all. I vote for Trump. I do all the things I got to do every primary. But then I realized there's nobody in this system with the guts. There's nobody with the guts and the decisiveness to do what needs to be done for 11 million people. And if this state of Ohio could just have a few Republicans like that for this ticket, can you imagine what we can achieve in this state in his 2 years of the presidency? And I said to myself, it's not the first time you stood up and raised your hand and put your life on the line. How is this any different? We saw what happened to one of our greatest civil rights leaders who spoke out and was bold. What did they do to him? Took him out. So nowadays when you run for office, your life's on the line. How's it any different from when I served downrange? The irony of America in the year 2026, we went overseas to keep a threat in this country from coming here. The threat came here, it was welcomed here, it took over government benefits programs, and then when we tried to eradicate or push the threat out of the country, now all of a sudden, our ICE agents and others are being harassed for following the enforcement of the law. But guess what? We're fighting because we have one man in the White House who's not letting it down. So we need more people like that here in Ohio. He cannot do everything. He needs agents here to do that, and we can serve in that role, we the people. So as I kind of wind this thing down, because I want to give you the time to give me questions, I want to talk to you about the success that we're having. I started this campaign in May of 2020. I met great people like Morgan Caruso. Get to know this lady. She's brave. She's in Cuyahoga County. She wants to fill an important void there in the legal system. You want to talk about fair legal in a brilliant mind, that's her. I started going to all these places. I went to Doris's in Parma. I went to Middlesburg Heights. I went here in October. You know what I was doing, ladies and gentlemen? I was building a volunteer army. Look around you. Look in this room. Look at this table over here. These people are amazing. They love this state. I'm not forgetting you from Summit County, Alicia Burrows. My point is, while everybody, okay, was busy either competing for lieutenant governor job, okay, or trying to figure out how their next job is going to lead to their next job, I was building a grassroots team of people for this day. And now I have, thank you. Now I have hundreds of volunteers and dozens of county leads, and I've raised several $100,000. That's unheard of for a grassroots candidate. That's 4,600 plus donors. National endorsements from General Michael Flynn. National endorsement from Cleta Mitchell, foremost integrity expert for President Donald Trump. There are more high-level endorsements. I just spoke at Butler County, 7th largest Republican county. Maybe not as important as Strongsville here, but let's be clear. They gave me a 70% endorsement and win among their central committee. Why? Because I am talking about the things that people want done. Here's another thing the Secretary of State can do, and none of them are talking about this right now. Do you know that every single business is formed through the Secretary of State's office in Ohio? That means all of these businesses in daycare and home health, they have to be formed through the Secretary of State's review. What stops the Secretary of State today from having information systems that identify activities to suggest that some of the limited liability businesses being formed have anomalous background information, and to push it over to the Public Integrity Division for greater investigation? The one thing we're missing is a governor who can stand up a joint task force, which I served in the National Capital Region. And let me tell you how I would run it if I was governor for a day, which I'll never be. But here's what we would do. Secretary of State brings the Public Integrity Division, makes sure the information systems are to be able to track this information about business formation. The Attorney General has the Medicare Control Fraud Unit with 160 investigators. You got the Department of Youth and Children. They're responsible for inspecting and or reviewing all of these, for example, daycares. All of them under the auditor should come together under a joint task force in the state of Ohio and every 30 days, give the people of Ohio an update for now because of the severity of the issue on what they are doing and what they are discovering. Start using that almost like those briefings we heard during COVID, where we have an opportunity to hear from them what they're doing about it. What I saw were basic statements put out that basically pointed fingers this way and that way, saying they could not, at the end of the day, fully address this issue. Now, it's true. Each of them, in and of themselves, has very limited specific authority under laws. But if you were to work as a whole unit, just like we do in the military, with that purpose and task, we can probably get at that issue, and the auditor would be appreciative of that because the auditor would now have investigative resources coming from all the different counties. Now, that's a novel concept, and I guess I just think like this because I guess I'm not in the Columbus system. But that's what exactly a mind like mine can do, and what it would do for you if you go forward and elect me May 5th, 2026. Fresh ideas, folks. That's what we need. Think out of the box. Because, you know, the thing is, I'm not focused on career. I'm focused on the mission. The mission is that you never have a 2020 election possibility ever happen here. I don't want to see a Democrat or a Republican ever complain that somehow their election, they don't trust it, they don't believe the outcome was what it was. If you don't trust the outcomes, you won't defend the outcomes, and that's how we will lose our country. So what did I tell you in the beginning? In the beginning, I said that your elections and the Secretary of State position is the most important position this race. I gave you an understanding my background, organizational and operational leadership experience, both in peacetime and war, tactical, operational, strategic. That's the mind that I have for this. Then I explained to you what I did. I didn't just tell you, I didn't memorize the lines like my competitor right now is busy memorizing rhetoric. I gave you the substance. I've been fighting this issue in battle for 3 years. I just didn't have the authority to make it happen. And then I finally got off my keister and I said, you know what? I will be that guy. I have the abilities, I have the passion and the will, and I am going to go for it. And I was decisive. And that is why we are winning this race. That is why on Election Day, when we win, and I get through this primary because of you, I am going to take all of those volunteers all across the state of Ohio, and I'm going to get every Republican elected up and down the ticket, and we will win 5 for 5 because I recognize at the end of the day, if we're going to have a disaffected group of voters, at least have one Trump Republican on that ticket to win over those people. It is absolutely critical if you're worried about 2026 that my candidacy prevails and that we get to the general election. So in the end, we want an election day. We don't want an election season. We want same-day in-person voting, pre-printed, hand-markable paper ballots. We don't want third-party voter interference in our system. We need accountability at the Board of Election level. They need to follow the Secretary of State's directives, or they're not the right person for the job, and we'll move them into an area that they can perform at their duty. People want accountability. I'm bringing that military mindset to this job. I'm fresh. I've got the will to do it, and I'm willing to deploy to Columbus if you send me there for 4 years. Thank you, Strongsville. You've been great. Let's take some questions. God bless all of you. Thank you for your interest in this campaign.
Thank you for coming here, and I think everybody here is with you, as am I after hearing you speak. Like, you are right on par. So, a little history about me. I'm a pastor's wife. I have 5 boys, 2 that have served in the military, 1 that's currently serving.
Awesome.
I'm also an election judge in the Medina County, a VLM. And so my husband asked me, why do I want to get involved in politics again? And I said, because election integrity is my number 1 thing.
Awesome.
So first of all, everyone here needs to be an election judge.
Agreed.
Every single one of you needs to go to your Board of Elections and you need to sign up. That is number 1. And then, so I have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
You mentioned the governor. Which candidate for governor will give you what you need to do your job?
I don't know the answer
and
to that.
I know it's a loaded
that's all right.
question.
I'm
It's a
observing.
loaded
I
question.
heard for the first time a full-length speech, and right now when I'm running my primary, no one's asking me to get in their race, and I'm not asking anybody to get in my race. I gotta run and beat a tough opponent.
You do. And
I do, but I'm open-minded to it, and I appreciated the comments tonight that were brought up. Think critically. Think critically. We have to think critically, because where we're going in 5 years, so I will support whatever candidate wins out of the primary. Like I said, my job is to get this election situation squared away in Ohio and take the ground game that I built. I'm the only candidate that built that, right? And I built that through sheer will, going to 46 different counties. I will put that to use to elect all Republicans up and down the ticket. And I wish all of the candidates who are competing the best. And I believe in the primary, you vote your conscience.
And that's really important. I just want everybody to know that if you, in case you missed it in his speech, it's really important that all the tickets are filled. You cannot have a Democrat just running or a Democrat running as a Republican. So it's really important what he's saying. And then I'm sorry. Yes, my next question is, sorry. So we know that the Democrats don't like voter ID. How do we convince the swing voters? I need you to give us an answer. How do we tell swing voters to vote for you?
I want all voters in Ohio to serve everybody, okay? Marcell Strbich, if you're going to use a third person, I don't like talking about myself in the third person, but if you're going to use a third person, you could say, this guy served his country. He served with people who are from all political persuasions. In the end, they were focused on getting the job done and objectively protecting the country. He feels that the voting systems have many ways have been compromised over the years. The political parties, the vendors have taken that and monetized the system. There's great people at the Board of Elections, and they work with the system that they have. The goal is to give them the means so that no one will ever question the elections again. And I don't want to see what we've seen on and off since 2000. Remember, it all started in 2000, at least in my lifetime. Right. And I was too young really to grasp it. But then they contested it in Ohio. And then it got contested again. Why are we stuck in this loop? Because we're not re-examining the assumptions that we have, because we chose a system of elections that's built on convenience and ballot accessibility. Instead, we should have chosen a system that's built on voter verifiability and security. And I will rebalance the equation so that becomes part of the equation, so that in the end, you still get the convenience, but we're going to first settle what we never settled since 1993. That's the reason I brought that up, because we've been running elections this way for 30 years. They like it, but 6 out of 10 Americans said in a Rasmussen poll right before the election that they were not sure in the outcome or trust of the outcome of the 2024 election. I have a problem with that, because that's not all Republicans. So to even people who are 71% of Ohio voters are unaffiliated. Did you know that? They're not in any party system. So the point is to tell them, you want to know that this system doesn't favor a Republican or doesn't favor a Democrat. It gives you equal opportunity. And how fitting is that on Martin Luther King Day? He argued for equal opportunity. Right. All right. So thank you for your question and your work as an election judge.
So you have talked to us about our election system now is security is at a 2005 level. Could you talk about that to the people a little bit?
Sure. All right, the question was, can we talk about why we continue to certify voting systems to a 2005 security standard? Here's the basis and the flaw in the system, and it usually comes from the federal government. When the federal government passed a law in 2002 called the Help America Vote Act, it was designed to push and change the entire vote casting system from one of paper ballots to one of electronic voting. And it took them a few years to build up some money to push that out, because it took hundreds of millions of dollars to retrofit the entire country. And at the time, the federal government did not require a certification standard be met. It was voluntary. It was voluntary, and they never changed that system. So as time went on, and we purchased all of these systems, nobody forced the voting system vendors to get a higher standard of security controls. And before you know it, we created a law in Ohio back in 2014 where the Secretary of State could certify the voting systems themselves. So there's never been an incentive, like most things, that result in these kind of monopolistic arrangements. There's never been an incentive for the voting system vendors to have to actually meet a standard higher than 2005. So why would they put money into a voting machine that they're making a ton of money on because there's only 3 companies or 4 companies selling them. It's basic economics. And until we have a Secretary of State and a legislature that change that and require a higher standard, we're going to continue to certify it like that. But that's why I think at the end, President Trump's executive order is the thing that breaks the camel's back. Because it says our votes cannot be recorded inside of QR codes and barcodes anymore. And that is so important because you need to see your vote before you put it inside of a voting machine. That's not, right now you're seeing a piece of paper that says it, but your vote's sitting there recorded in computer software and you cannot see it. And that has to change. So that's why I'm a big advocate of pre-printed hand markable ballots.
Hey, Marcell, thanks very much for being here and for your service and your wonderful family. Can you give us, I guess I'm looking for some hope as far as single-day voting, just election day voting with voter ID. What could we do with all the millions of dollars that has been spent on computers and all this, the lawsuits and all that? Maybe we need the purple finger like in Afghanistan?
Yeah, we could use that. You know, Mexico has the finger too. Mexico, they put the thumb in there for voting. So let me address that. It's a smart question. Right now we're spending $12 million of voting machines inside of critical bonds. 10 years ago, the state of Ohio called voting machines critical facilities. They did that so they can hook us into voting machines in all 88 counties for the foreseeable future. When John Husted was the Secretary of State in 2018, the budget for the Secretary of State was $17 million. At the end of this Secretary of State's term, the expenditures were $65 million. That's a 325% increase. Think about how much money we're spending trying to protect computerized software with cybersecurity that at the end of the day, you can't protect the system from 2005. It's absolutely ludicrous. Of course, that's not the only area of the budget we saw grow in Ohio. Since 2022, the budget went from $74 billion to $105 billion. In the meantime, you're paying your property taxes, you're doing all the things to kind of sustain the system, and even our budgets aren't even balanced at this point. So we are not necessarily squared away on this, but what I would do is by going to a pre-printed hand markable ballot system, that allows me to look at the $12 million within the bond system and consider which Board of Elections right now could use more workers to qualify eligibility, which is important up front, which is a main objective of mine, so that we never have bad voter records, right? So we need to get that straightened out, and then we can pay them some more money.
Okay.
Would I rather pay a human more money than pay for a voting machine? Yes, if you're willing to participate in that election system process. So does that answer your question?
Second to last question, folks. Morgan Caruso. Hi, Marcell, and thank
Hi.
you for your service and the veterans in the room. Thanks for your presentation tonight. I continue to be very impressed by you,
Thank you.
especially your ideas about voter integrity. Thank you. My question's about all this Somali fraud going on. Okay, you mentioned tonight that as Secretary of State, the daycare stuff would all the registration would go through the Secretary of State. So I, like many people, continue to be very disturbed by this. I hear that Columbus is a big hub, that this is going on throughout Ohio. So my question is twofold. What do you think about it? And secondly, what, as hopefully our new Secretary of State, could you or would you do about it?
I appreciate this question. What I first think about it is, where has everybody been while this has been happening in Columbus? You knew this kind of activity can go about. It's not like we don't think, for example, these communities haven't figured out how to get it and touch an advantage of the system. So does anybody who's been on the job deserve to still be on the job after that happened? I don't think in this case the Secretary of State candidate running against me should, because he hasn't spoken out about any of these things. He's never been out in front on anything. He waits to see where things go. Now here's where I see a positive development. There is a rep, Josh Williams, who did put out a bill, and in his bill, we're talking about getting the cameras in all of these facilities. We're talking about storing that data for 60 days or requiring those entities in Columbus to do that. I appreciate Rep. Williams doing that. He's the only one that I'm looking at right now that's putting solutions on the table. With the Secretary of State, though, and I want to see the information systems because I have to get an assessment to know how the data analytics works, what are the user requirements that the Secretary of State has available to detect that type of activity that would indicate that multiple LLCs are being registered in a given location, or that, for example, indicate that they've changed their names or rebranded several times. So there's areas the Secretary of State can utilize internally to investigate and then pass that over. But we truly need a state joint task force that combines Attorney General, Auditor, Secretary of State, and Department of Youth and Children to finally start to uncover the depth of it. And we should allow for citizen tips. And I know that they just created a webpage for that, but we need citizen tips because that's a key part of investigation and discovery. Am I right, Counsel? You got to see what they have seen, because without eyeballs, it's all supposition. I think these people have been in their offices like I was in the Pentagon for too long, and they need to get out of their offices and see what's going on. Thank you for the question.
Hi, Marcell. Thanks for coming. My question is, you talked about the separation between our driver's license and a voter's registration. What department and who is preventing those from being joined together? And the second part of the question is, my understanding is we have over 12 to 14 different election machines that none of the counties actually have access to the software. So we have at least all of them. None of them have access to the software. So how do we ever know that the system is correct? And last but least is, you talk about the paper ballot, which I'm all for. How do we get that voted in, or what has to happen to get that voted in? I know President Trump wants to do it, but how do we get that voted in here at the state of Ohio level?
All right, that's 3 questions. You're really stretching my capacity mentally, but I'll start with the paper drill, okay? Already some counties in Ohio do pre-printed hand-markable paper ballots. There's nothing stopping the Secretary of State from issuing a directive within a reasonable period of time. I say reasonable because the Board of Elections need time to account for changing from a predominant computerized vote casting system to pen and paper, right? That could be 180 days, it could be 270 days, but the means exists, and the counties already go out and make contracts for those type of materials and acquisition. So the counties are empowered for that issue. In terms of the other question, which came up about the voting systems and the inability for the County Board of Elections to look into the software code to assess them for risk and security. I wrote legislation last year which would have required third-party independent review of those voting system services so that it's not just the vendors deciding that. So in the end, we can pass that legislation, or we can go straight with pre-printed hand-markable ballots. And then the last question on driver's licenses, it's really simple. Everybody should have a copy of a photo ID when casting a mail-in or an in-person ballot. In Ohio today, if you cast a ballot by mail, you are not required to provide a copy of a photo ID. That is wrong. That is creating an unequal standard, and we are inviting third-party groups, thank you, we are inviting third-party groups to take advantage of that loophole. In an administration that I would be in, I would work with the legislature. There's a bill called HB 577 that's out there right now, which closes that loophole and makes sure that everybody's required to either show a copy of their photo ID or is going to be bringing it with them in person. We've got to handle that one really quick. So thank you so much for all of your questions tonight. You all have been great and engaging. God bless you. I hope to be back here soon.
Great. Marcell, thank you so much. Appreciate it again. Everyone, Marcell Strbich, running for Secretary of State.